have decided to run this session is that I will be asking 7 questions, and each member of the panel will be speaking roughly 1 minute per question, and that would give us perhaps a total of 1 hour, roughly 60 minutes, to give my calculation. And after that, we will have about 30 minutes for your questions, comments, and suggestions, okay? So, let's start with the first question about quality, definition of quality, what we understand by quality in translation in general, and in community translation in particular. And let's start with one of the organizers of this great event, Erica.
Thank you, Mustafa. Well, for me as a trainer, but also a practicing translator, there's been, I think, a gap between the practice and the theory. So to me, it's important that whoever is producing a translation knows about the ethics, knows that translating community translation is different to translating advertising, and obviously, sometimes we forget that translators need to translate impeccably into the language they are translating. I know this sounds really basic, but we still get graduates, despite we've got an aptitude language test for both languages. You still get the students who do not master both languages at the level which is required to produce a commercially acceptable translation. I know they are still in a program, but every now and then you also go to websites, and it's happened to me with the Spanish, and you still see translations published out there with horrible grammatical mistakes, punctuation mistakes. So I would start from the basics, someone who writes perfectly in the target language. And then obviously we've got issues regarding ethics, that they stick to the content, and as we know, accuracy cannot just be explained in a couple of lines. The code of ethics is important, but we cannot have a 100-page code of ethics. So therefore, I would insist on training that incorporates not just ethics, but discourse, advanced theories, etc., etc.
Thank you. Thank you. Nora, what's the perspective of the accreditation or certification body?
Thank you, Mustafa. Now, in very simplified terms, for NAATI, a good quality translation is when a translator produces a translation that allows successful communication between the writer and the reader. And of course, that's a very simplified statement. And of course, there's many things that go into making the communication successful. And some of the things that we are looking at in the certification test are meaning transfer, language proficiency, also does the translator take into account the audience of the translation, the text itself, and the expected norms and conventions of the target language.
Thank you, Nora. Quentin?
It's a very good question. I was very interested in some of the talks, particularly yesterday morning, and they've been very much weighing in my mind. But our approach to quality isn't so much in any particular aspect of the text or the translator. It's more in focusing on exactly what the purpose of the entire exercise is. All of the translations we get are commissioned by somebody in government who has a very, what they think is a very clear idea as to what they want to achieve. And it's absolutely crucial that whatever we do helps them to achieve that goal. So purpose is front and foremost, and that varies a lot between official translations, publications, treaties that we would check through, those kind of things. So that on the one hand, but I was thinking about this a little bit yesterday too, and translation is very much, it's a claim. We're claiming that this text in some meaningful way represents this other text. So when we receive translations, the government agency usually has perhaps a very fixed idea as to what can be achieved through translation. They have written the text, and they'll be a little puzzled if you're not going to follow what they've written. Why can't you just translate what I wrote? So with that claim, I think comes a responsibility to communicate very clearly with the client there to explain exactly what is possible what's really not possible, and what a realistic outcome is going to be using translation. So, perhaps it's a slightly different approach, but the purpose front and foremost, but also honouring this claim that we're making that it's a translation and not a rewrite, and managing the aspects of responsibility actually and control that come with that. Because to a large extent, the agencies we work with, they take responsibility for the outcomes, and they want to have some sort of transparency over what it is that's actually being written in the foreign language.
Okay, my focus is on processes, established, proven processes of, I guess, undertaking a project. And I'd like to reflect on all of the, I guess, players in that project. And by that I mean, thank you. Okay, so what I'm referring to is that the established processes involve, right from the commencement of reviewing or assessing the source text by a project manager to ensure that the source text is suitable for translation. Next stage is whether the source text can be modified if it's not suitable. And once we go through those stages, do we have a suitable team of translators, so a translator, a reviewer, independent checker? So we need to ensure that those people are also available. We need to also understand whether the customer might have any influence or want to take part in the actual translation process. So we need to establish these right from the commencement. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're producing, I guess, an outcome that's not really satisfactory to each of the players. So we need to ensure that the translator understands the content, is able to actually translate that. The checker understands their role and is able to communicate with the translator to be able to actually accept the checker's comments. And these are all, I guess, linkages that need to be established right from the commencement. And the outcome is the quality of the translation.
Can I start before I answer the question by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of Mushumi and pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. To answer your question, I think Ishmael and the others are right. We've heard about this yesterday as well. The important bit is the source text. If we get the source English text right, the translation procedure shouldn't be too difficult. As a director in a public health service, I expect the translation to be of the highest quality possible. It has to be translated by not just NATA-certified translators, but also translators who are specialized in the health context. The level of the translation should never be lowered to cater for the patient, because they may or may not understand. If we get the source English text right, the patient will have no issue whatsoever. I'm happy in the following questions to talk to how we do that.
Yeah.
But that's a starting point for me.
Thanks a lot. Michael?
So there's two questions I'm answering now, is it? Sorry.
Just your definition, your perception of quality.
I suppose I always go back to fit for purpose. So this, if you ever walk on social media, there's a guy called Simon Sinek, and he just asked why. I think a lot of confusion and conflict is resolved by asking, why are we doing this? So as a marketing person, as well as somebody who looks at translations, I even ask clients, why are we doing this printed information? If they say, oh, we want to change the behavior of people who smoke. So where does this fit in the behavior change model? And I think so to me, that's, sometimes it's annoying for other government departments and also for the translators, because it's important for us to have this agreement of why, of what the big picture is. And sometimes we say maybe a translation is not the best thing for this, and I think somebody yesterday alluded to this process. The other thing is it's a shared responsibility. So we're not looking at just quality assurance for the translators, but also for the input from the users. So we actually build capacity of other health organizations. Unfortunately, some people, depending on their experience, they just latch onto a concept like back translation or NATI level 3, and that's all they insist without understanding why they're insisting on this. Particularly now with new formats like radio, sometimes they say to us, "Oh, we need a NATI level 3 to translate a radio script." And sometimes radio scripts rely on creativity and that concept of double meaning. So we need to have that understanding of that. It's more nuanced, I suppose. So to me, it's not just a black and white thing. It's about negotiation of meaning and responsibility.
Thank you, Michael.
Community translations in the context of Australia into the Spanish language, which is what I specialize on, is very complex because we are targeting about 20 different countries that speak Spanish, and everybody lives in Australia. So achieving that high level of quality might not mean that our text is going to sound natural to everybody. My focus as a Spanish translator is for everybody to understand what I say.
So we have accessibility, the ability of the audience to understand, and a couple of you have mentioned purpose, fit for purpose, which resonates with functionalist theories. Now let's start from the left side with Sonia this time. What do you do as a professional translator to ensure that the final product is a quality product?
First and foremost, getting a very comprehensive briefing. I feel very strongly about briefing because you can't target your community, your translation to your community if you don't know who your community is, and if you don't know what the author or the organization is trying to achieve by translating that content. I also think it's really important to keep open communication channels. It's very, very important to communicate with client, communicate with the community and everybody along the way to make sure that those translations are suitable for the purpose that they've been done.
Thank you. Michael?
Sure, I think quality, we involve the end user at the very start. But also my nerdy brain says, what's the theoretical framework of this particular piece of communication? So to me, it's really important that there's a sound evidence of your logic. So you can't, and I think when we first started, we actually did a review of the role of printed information. And we know that it increases understanding, but it's very poor in terms of actual behavior change, particularly complex behaviors like obesity, like losing weight. Reading a number, understanding something, yes, but you need to combine that, and it's really that having that evidence base that backs you up, and also being frank about the expectations. Like as you said, Spanish or Arabic, we actually from the start say there might be a bias because in New South Wales, Arabic speakers are mainly from Lebanon. So in terms of like we've done something recently on shisha, and people say, it's hookah, that water pipe. Which do you use? Are we alienating this? So it's really important to have that understanding from the very start. So co-designing and seeing and inviting people, the end users at the start is one of them.
Within our public health hospital, and specifically at Northern Health, where I work, we try where possible, and we often succeed, to develop the source text with the author. Then the content, to make sure that the content is accessible and cultural. So I can give you a brief example. Once we developed some material with a dietitian, and it was one of the target audiences was the Turkish community, and there were pictures of kids throughout the booklet. So we are involved from the very start with the author. Then we run the content as consumers. So we have called culturally diverse consumers in relevant committees that review the text. Then it's translated. Now we are lucky enough that in most languages we have at least 2 or 3 interpreters. So there's a second, 2 or 3 translators. So there's a second translator that reviews the translation, and then And then it goes, then it's published on the website and on the translation.
Thank you. Ismail.
In answering this question, I'm going to be focusing again on processes, but more specifically project management. With regards to, I guess, any project, often we will translate from English into multiple languages. So we're not really looking at language specific. We're looking at how do we manage multiple languages within a given time period, within the budget, within the subject matter expertise. So we're looking at all of these parameters right from the beginning. So when we get asked to undertake a project, we will approach the translators, the checkers, and anyone else involved, such as DTP or any coding that might be involved in that. So we ensure that all the relevant stakeholders are available and can commit to that. And we also give them the actual translation to site and to confirm that that's within their expertise to produce it in that time frame, and that they will work with all the other, I guess, team members. So I think it goes to the very heart of the final quality that's required. Do we have all the resources, the human resources as well as the technical, within the time frame that we can produce this? So there's no point taking on a project and then approaching translators and everyone else. So we would actually do the other way around. We would approach the translators, checkers, everyone else involved, get their commitment, cite the document, and if there are any issues at that time, that we would actually approach the customer to ask for either a modification on a per language or the whole project to extend the date. It's quite common where the client will dictate the deadline, and we know the client doesn't understand all of the nuances at language level. So if we're translating something, let's just say something in relation to diabetes, well, into some of the mainstream languages, that may be straightforward. But if we're translating that into perhaps one of the new or emerging languages, such as, well, most recently, we have an influx of Kurdish. If we were translating into that, we don't know the level of expertise in those translators. So we would have to ascertain from those translators whether they're capable, if not what support they need from us or the customer. So that particular language may require extra time. So we would be negotiating all of that for the sole purpose of producing the quality required. So we're not there just to appease the customer's requirements, we're there to produce a quality outcome.
Okay. So firstly, I agree with most of what's been said already. I think our processes are very similar to many other agencies around, and I would re-emphasise the stress on the importance of the project manager in this environment. So, of course, you need a translator who is competent, who has the knowledge in a particular area, and has been very, very well briefed on what to do. I think that's almost a given. But I don't think quality can fall entirely on the shoulders of the translator. I do think there is this discussion that needs to be had between the project manager and the client to work out exactly what it is that they're trying to achieve, how a particular approach will get there, and the project manager then needs to bring their experience to bear to work out, well, actually, we might need another checking level, or we might need to, well, actually, we don't need to do that, we can do this, and sort that out. So the project manager is very much taking on the responsibility on behalf of the client of the quality of the project, because they have expertise in what it takes, and what sort of checking, what sort of desktop publishing or whatever it is that's going to be required. So I work in the government translation office, the translation service for internal affairs. So the types of assignments we get are very varied, and they are very different across the board. So yeah, I would definitely emphasise the role of the project manager in this, in managing that quality process.
Thank you. Nora?
Thank you. Now, as the certification body, NAATI does not directly oversee the production of individual translations, but in certifying practitioners, we ensure that the people who are certified have the skills and knowledge to produce quality translations. So about 4 years ago, we undertook a project where we determined the skills and knowledge each translator needs to have to successfully work in the industry. And for example, those are the ones that I mentioned earlier. So for example, transferring a meaning from a source language into a target language, but also writing the translation in a way that it is suitable for the audience. And we assess all of those aspects in our certification tests, and each candidate who passes that test has then demonstrated that they have all those skills and knowledge required. Another thing that NAATI does is recognise the importance of education and training to support translators and give them the skills and knowledge they need. So as part of our certification system, we have now a compulsory training requirement in place, and every candidate needs to fulfil that before they can sit the test.
Yes, I believe that a translator, before they go out there, they really need to have, as I said before, a very solid foundation, so that then they comply with the requirements of the race. How do we make that possible? To me, it's really important, because I was trained in Europe, and many of my teachers were philologists who had never translated a line. So most of, I would say all of our colleagues, and many of them are here today with us from the various institutions which are represented in this conference, we are all also practicing translators, and we are in touch of the reality. The good thing about the recertification system is that the system obliges you, obviously, to be active. And that means that you are in contact with the real world. So you know what you are requiring from your students. You are in touch with the demands of the workforce, or what the institutions are requiring. So I would say solid foundations. And to me, it's also important that these institutions then employ our graduates. As Nora said, up until now, basically, no one needed to be formally trained to be a translator or an interpreter in Australia. You would just sit a 75-minute exam and off you go. Who would trust a lawyer or a doctor who's just sat for a 75-minute exam? So I think that training lies the foundation of that, the structure of professionalism. So yeah, training, but training delivered by people who have that theoretical knowledge, who keep abreast with research, but also who practice. So I would say that it's something really holistic, and then I would like to throw also work integrated learning, because you can say whatever in the classroom, but being exposed to the reality, it's great. And as I said, having academics or tutors who are working out there and can bring past projects into the classroom also is really important.
Okay, Erica, I'll throw this direct question to you as an academic, and you can speak for us and our programs if you like. Do you think that the current programs we're offering at different universities, whether at undergraduate or postgraduate level, are able to produce or graduate translators who can produce quality translations?
I believe so. Obviously, we need to keep improving, and I'm always very critical. I think in our team, we are very critical and trying to get feedback from our tutors in the different language combinations we offer. We try to upgrade our programs continually. I believe when it comes to community translation, yes, because it's a very Australian thing. Mostly we do community translation. So in that sense, yes. The gap I see is that new technologies are coming, and I do believe that sometimes we haven't caught up with that. So, and also the other gap I see is the project management side of it. So we focus a lot on the text, on the product, and obviously the process, but there are other elements of the translation process that, for example, we do not address that way. I think that's something that could be implemented a bit more, the project management side of it, and so that the students see also how the other side works. I always tell them that they don't work in a vacuum. The translator is one more actor in that translation process, and they need to be aware of the needs and demands of the other parties as well. So I think we need to work on that a little bit more. But in a nutshell, I would say that we do prepare good graduates.
We'll give you another chance to speak about training and professional development, if you like, from Marty's point of view.
As I already mentioned, the education of translators and also interpreters is something that we recognise as absolutely needed in the industry. But in addition to that, also the ongoing professional development of all practitioners to ensure that practitioners stay up to date with what's happening in the industry and that they maintain and update their skills. Now, NAATI itself does not provide professional development courses, but we very much promote courses offered by other institutions, and those are AUSID and ASLIA, but also many universities and TAFEs these days offer short courses, sometimes online or webinars. And where we know about those, we do promote those to the practitioners, to our certified practitioners, either via our website or our monthly e-newsletter. So if any of you are looking for professional development opportunities, please make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter, because it does have all the information in it about upcoming opportunities.
Thank you, Nora.
You said that NAATI is very active in funding all these BDs.
Thank you very much, Erica. That's a good point. NAATI has, where possible, been supporting organisations and providing funding to run and develop professional development opportunities. And I think many practitioners have benefited from that.
Including this conference.
Yes, thank you.
Again, around training?
Yes. Well, in your service, for example, or how often do your translators undertake these professional development events?
Gosh, that's a very good question. The first thing that comes to mind for professional development is, again, the technological gap. So we do it with a number of linguists who are excellent linguists, but do struggle with some of the IT requirements, and that's problematic, to say the least. We're certainly seeing an increase in work which is more related with audiovisual translations from the public sector, that is. So subtitling, I think a lot of this was covered in the conference. So there's a whole area where it is technological, but it's also how to apply the linguistic lens to that technology. In the sense of subtitling translations is just not the same as other forms of translation, for example, or the checking is different. You're checking for different things and different text types. I would love to be able to say that we have a budget and we fund lots of training for translators, but it's just simply not true. We have no budget. So the in-house development of our people is really the in-house people, unfortunately. It doesn't extend to freelance translators. But on that note, the in-house development has very much been looking at different, subtitling has been one area that we've been looking at quite a lot recently, but also in the other applications of NMT, is there a good use case there for the kind of translations we get? And that's what I'm going to put in my head, to be honest. So yes.
Thank you, Quentin.
At all graduates, we don't necessarily have professional development directly related to translators, but what we do is coach translators and checkers in terms of how to negotiate circumstances when someone or an organisation challenges their translation. For instance, it's quite common to have health translations vetted by in-house interpreters or translators. Some of the areas that we come across often is where the translation is checked by an interpreter. And they're not necessarily experienced translators, so they're looking at it from their perspective in terms of how they use language as an interpreter, not necessarily, being faithful to the actual source document. So the translator is remaining faithful to the source document, but the in-house interpreter is, I guess, influenced by the way that they use spoken language. So these are some of the challenges we're confronted with, and our way to approach this is by coaching the translator on how to perhaps substantiate their choices and how they can work with that in-house team to, I guess, resolve and agree on the final outcome.
Ismail, you mentioned the word coaching. So in a team, is there or are there opportunities for translators to be mentored by experienced ones?
I guess so. I haven't, I guess, had that experience, but certainly some of the mentoring that has happened is between the translator and checker. Because we're asking the checker to be independent, we're not disclosing who that person is to the original translator. Only until the translator comes back and says that they disagree with the checker. And at that stage, if we think it's appropriate, we'll ask both to actually engage, discuss, and come out, resolve it. So through that sort of dynamic, we do ask that the more experienced translator substantiate their, position to coach the other translator, whether it's they're checking or whether they're the actual translator. Because ultimately, we rely on the original translator to produce the final document.
Thank you. Thank you, Ismail.
From my point of view, moving from the accreditation scheme to the certification scheme has been fundamental. Until now, the quality of interpreters and translators is not uniform. There is too much variety within the same language. The level of English, I can only judge Italian, but I can judge what is English, and it tells me whether someone is a good translator or interpreter. If they make silly grammatical mistakes in English, my trust in that person disappears. So the certification scheme obviously forces interpreters and translators to recertify and to do professional development, and I think that's a fantastic move forward, and hopefully it will make the standard more even across every language. As far as professional development is concerned, our in-house interpreters and translators are encouraged to do all the professional development that ICCT or NATI or universities such as RMIT or Monash run. On top of that, we have a monthly LAFIT forum. LAFIT stands for Lost and Found in Translation, where all the in-house interpreters and translators come together, and we discuss either ethical matters during those meetings or specifically translation matters. So those are texts coming from whatever department, the interpreters share their approach, what type of solutions should they look for to make sure that was translated appropriately. The other thing that we do, Erika mentioned this before, is we welcome students from RMIT and Monash. It's a very worthwhile experience for them, but also for us in identifying the good potential interpreters and translators of the future, and a number of them we have employed.
Thank you. Perhaps, Michael, this question doesn't apply to you directly, but feel free to comment.
So, if I ask you as translators, say a project and said you're going to translate some of these texts on Facebook, and the first term is LOL. People know that laughing out loud. So that's one of the issues. So picking up from Erica's point, so at the moment it's not a systematic, formalized, assessed. It's more coaching about the culture and the thinking, or as David referred earlier, the iceberg part. So if you look at the different players in that ecosystem, so we need to explain to somebody who's not accredited level 3 about Facebook, and to have an honest conversation. If you use Facebook only sporadically to show pictures of what you eat, you probably don't understand the need for a register and the need to discuss fossilization of language, for example. So, and also moderating and what the language is and why we talk about the personality. Sometimes people go, "Are you crazy?" Because so we need to explain the personality of this particular health organization in this particular campaign is your friendly mother, that sort of thing. And it's something that's new and people are getting used to that. So for us, we see ourselves more of the culture, the organizational culture interpreters for the different stakeholders. So for clients, we actually say, this is why we need to ask you 6 years from now, what are you going to do with these translations? Because some government departments, who will remain nameless, you'd find that sometimes they find financial resources towards the end of financial year because all of a sudden they want to show that they're complying to access and equity and diversity. So there's all of a sudden 30 languages. But then we say to them, okay, what's the distribution? And how, if there's a correction in 6 years' time, who's the responsible person? More often than not, and again, some, not all, basically say, we won't actually let's reduce it to 3. And then they say, oh, actually you can't, and just change this word. We can't just change a word. We need to explain that process to them. So for us, it's about having that, again, the discussion of the why and also looking at the briefs. But more or less for us, it's more coaching in terms of culture.
Thank you, Michael. Sonia, I guess in your case, we need to reframe the question in terms of how often do you undertake professional development as a translator, and whether you think or you find it feasible in view of the commitments you have and the constraints as a professional translator.
The training or professional development that I focus on is industry specific. I find very valuable to attend to industry events of the areas where I translate, which could be palliative care or end of life or cancer treatments. I just think it's really, really important to understand those contexts to be able to translate correctly. I try to do it at least once a month. Sometimes I do it more often, and in the busier times I probably don't do it as much. I've also been doing some training on clear communication and accessibility and what that might look like for a translator, not only plain language, which is a very trending topic, but also easy English, which is English for people with disabilities. Also helping organize some LGBTIQA plus terminology workshops for my colleagues, because I think it's very important as well to have that platform and forum where we all get together to try and tackle the issues that are racing with the LGBTIQA plus terminology.
Thank you, Sonia. Now, the next question is about collaboration between us as language services, professional translators, etc., and other stakeholders. In your case, Sonia, what kind of collaboration do you have with other entities?
I do a lot of consultation with community members. A lot of the time, because I am from Spain and I am translating for Colombians and Argentinians and Mexicans and all Latin American countries, that's a bit of a challenge. So I do like to workshop terminology and consult community members on whether they would understand certain terminology that I'm considering using in my translation work. I find that's really valuable when trying to achieve the level of quality that I was talking about before, which is making sure that everybody understands what I write.
I'm sure everyone here, or most of us, would agree that Michael's profile is very relevant to the work, the kind of work we do as translators. As someone who is not directly involved in translation or management of language services, what kind of collaboration or relationship have you had with other organizations who are directly involved in the production of translations?
Okay, so again, looking at what the purpose is. So anything, and I've been lucky that I've been in the industry for 23 years. So the network, the media networks. So if again, think ecosystem. So if there's an issue, who will be concerned? So ethno-specific doctors, people with lived experience, most powerful, because these are the stories, these are the most credible people. Social media. I know I keep probably bored by this time, but it's amazing the feedback that you get. Some are pretty rough, but some are like, yes, this is spot on, and you know exactly when you're making a mistake, and it's there for everyone to see. And people who are affected by the particular issues. So one particular example is, we tried something with the Pink Sari project with women from Indian background, Sri Lankan backgrounds, women affected by breast cancer. They wanted to translate. They wanted not to translate, but they call it adaptation. So we gave them the key information. I think what they were saying yesterday were, here's the key information. They didn't tear up the document, but they rendered it as if they're talking to other women. And then we got a translator to check. The same document, we got a doctor who wrote in Tamil and write it as if they're talking to their patient, acknowledging the power dynamics. Again, checked by the translator. So we're looking at all of those things, and again, I think that think big picture, like what's the big purpose, and then identify who those things. So I suppose in short, everyone who I think is part of the ecosystem is involved in that conversation.
Thank you, Michael. Emiliano?
I suppose that there are 4 levels of collaboration. The first one is the consumer, which in our case is the patient, as I said before, the clinician. Then there has to be a collaboration between translators and interpreters themselves. So part of the objective of the Lost and Found Translation Forum is just that, to encourage an exchange, challenge, intellectual pursuit of sorts. The 4th level of collaboration, I think, has to be between, in my case, again, health services and universities. So I try and work very closely with RMIT and with Monash, because somehow we need to pass that understanding back to the tertiary institution who trains the students. And last but not least, research. It's really, really important to maintain high levels of research.
Thank you. Ismail?
What comes to my mind is collaboration with the commissioning client. For example, when translators undertake technical documents, particularly on a global basis, there's the use of CAT tools. So there's management of glossary, management of phrases for consistency. Because we're often translating into multiple languages, we need to get some consistency. Within the community sector, the use of CAT tools is rather rare, and there is not really a mechanism to maintain accepted terminology, phrases that have been translated in the past. To be able to produce the consistency, we need to collaborate with the client to ascertain if they have previously translated certain phrases, terminology, to then collect that, instruct the translators, the checkers, on what has been accepted, and not to change those if they have already been translated and accepted. So I think there is a significant role the customers play in that initial collaboration.
Thank you, Ismail.
First of all aspects of the work that we carry out is collaboration in one sense or another. So I suppose you could draw it out to include the work between project managers and translators and revisers and just all that sort of thing. That's really the nuts and bolts, though. The office I work in, it's I see as one of its core roles is to provide a degree of advice and a degree of inspiration to government agencies as to what they can actually achieve with languages. So again, I guess it's going back to the client before the client's a client. Discussions with various departments about, well, why aren't you doing something in this area? Why can't you? What about looking at where languages would be appropriate? So I'm not sure how many examples I should throw in there. But certainly the kind of work that we do ranges from transcriptions and translation of what goes on in Parliament, what goes on in state committees, looking at the information that goes onto websites, looking at corrections, I guess, what sort of information is available, health departments. It really goes on and on. Sometimes it does feel a little bit like being a lone voice within government, trying to communicate exactly what is worthwhile and what probably isn't so worthwhile. So again, the selection of languages. So yes, it all comes under the line of collaboration.
Organisations, yes, but also on an individual level with practitioners. We have what we call regional advisory committees in our states, and these committees are made up of practitioners, of representatives from institutions and language service providers. And these committees meet on a regular basis and discuss any current matters that are relevant to the industry, to the practitioners and to NAATI, and that way we stay up to date with what's happening in the industry. And it's a very important forum for us to be in direct contact with the practitioners. But of course also another opportunity for NAATIs to come to fantastic conferences like this one here today and yesterday, to have direct contact with the practitioners and to listen to you and to get your feedback about what you think is important in the industry.
Is there a reporting channel with NAATI, for example, if there are quality issues?
Yes, we do have a formal complaints process in place. So if a receiver of a translation has a concern about a translation, they can contact NAATI directly. We initially try to get the receiver of the translation to get in contact with the translator to work through any differences in opinion, and often we do find that there's just minor misunderstandings about possibly the purpose of the translation or some individual terms. So in most cases we find that the translator and the client are able to work through those differences themselves. But if there is a larger concern or if they can't work through that themselves, we do have a formal complaints process available for anyone to contact NAATI.
Thank you. Erika?
In terms of collaborations, obviously universities or educational institutions, we don't have direct contact with the clients, but then we have direct contact with those who work with the clients. And for example, Emiliano is part of our industry advisory committee. So RMIT, for example, being a technical university, and other universities do it via similar or other channels, that they sit with us every few months, twice a year, basically, and tell us what the gaps are and what we should implement in our training programs. So I find that a very valuable exercise because they are the ones in contact with basically the direct clients. So I've attended a few of those meetings since I've been at RMIT, and personally as a trainer, but also as a part of OSIT, I find those really valuable when we receive the information and then we can implement that directly into our training programs or our PD sessions as well. And obviously we collaborate directly with OSIT and with NAATI, but also private and public language service providers.
Thank you, Erika. At this conference, the concept of collaboration with the relevant communities, the target readership, etc., has been repeatedly mentioned. Now, in terms of within the question about relationships with other partners and stakeholders, do you have any specific partnership or relationship with the relevant communities, the communities who receive the translation product?
Well, so far, this can be done in form of ways, work integrated learning. For example, I know that yourselves at Western Sydney University collaborate with SLASA, which is a Spanish-speaking association where the students can go and provide their translations. So I see it more in form of those kind of partnerships, but as I said, at the moment at least, we don't have many, and many other colleagues who are here maybe could speak as well. I think that the direct contact with the communities is difficult because of privacy issues as well. So it has to come in form of a collaboration, institutionalized collaboration because of that.
Or collaboration in research projects?
Or in research projects, that's correct, where you also involved the recipients of those translations, and obviously they are surveys, they provide their responses regarding quality, regarding their interaction with translator or interpreters, but I would say it's more in a more institutionalized scenario.
Good.
Thank you. Similar to what Erica just said, NAATI doesn't necessarily have to direct contact with the recipients of the translation, but we do have close contacts with language service providers, and we regularly meet with them and listen to their feedback and concerns, so that way we get the indirect feedback about the translations that the recipients receive.
Thank you.
Again, for us, this goes back to that relationship with the government agency. Usually, at least in my experience, most government agencies have not come up with their texts in a vacuum. They have developed them through a particular process, had the right experts involved, and usually there is a channel for community consultation already there. So really, the core thing there is to understand what those channels are and make sure that they are extended to the extended audience of the texts. So again, the project manager's role in, I guess, liaising and informing the customer about what's possible and having that discussion around, well, actually maybe you need to extend your user testing group to another, to include more people. But actually, there's no need to reproduce that from a translation agency point of view, because usually there is something there.
I'm going to be focusing on focus groups. Often we'll be invited to tender, quote, take on a project once it's already been decided upon. So if we get in, however, at the early stages of when the project is being considered and in the process of developing the content, we would encourage, subject to funding and so forth, where there's two levels of focus testing. So we would invite members of the community to be involved in the development of the content that's very specific to them. So particularly when we're dealing with, for example, mentioned Spanish, and another language that's relevant is Arabic, where we have more than one country speaking Arabic. So how do we actually look at some of the nuances if we are dealing with localizing it for a Lebanese speaking, or is it a broader use of Arabic? So we get involved in that stage by understanding what the community would want in terms of the content. And the next level of community focus really is the acceptability or the acceptance of the translation. So once it's gone through the translation process and before it's been finalised, we have one more level of feedback.
Thank you.
Of course, as we've been saying for the last 2 days, consultation with the community, co-designing with the community is fundamental. However, I like to play devil's advocate. There's a lot of people that present themselves as community leaders. We have to remember that when we consult with someone, it's unlikely that someone can represent a whole community. So it's really, really important. Often these community things are tick-the-box exercise, and quite frankly, the value in having the same 2 or 3 people always as your consultant, the people you consult with, it's great. There's no validity to that. I prefer to work with communities representatives. So rather than go and choose an Italian, a Spanish, an Arabic speaking, a Turkish person and so on, where there is a migrant resource center that tends to represent a wider body of people. So yes, it's really, really important, but let's be careful because there's a high risk of generalization or stereotyping and achieving the opposite result.
Thanks. Michael, you've already mentioned the SARI project. Well, maybe you can...
Okay, so another example, I think there's a role for focus groups and all these different processes of consultation, but I think one of the things, the blind spots as the unintended outcomes of your communication campaign or translations. So I'll give you an example. A large agency did focus testing, translates, and check back all the quality assurance at a textual level. The campaign was, if you've been in Australia the last 10 years, you can save, by cutting down on your smoking, you can actually save this amount of money, and the money can go to a particular place. You can, a holiday. And for China, it was like you can go back to Beijing. For Vietnam, the example they used was you can go back to Ho Chi Minh. So for those, any Vietnamese translators here? Okay, so that wasn't picked up at the translator level, but it was picked up by what I call my critical allies. So the Vietnamese organization said, how dare you remind us, go back to our history, particularly. This was not picked up by any of the agencies, and of course they actually alerted us. It wasn't our campaign, but it was a good way to show the relationship. That relationship is very important. So the offline relationship is good, but now part of my research is how you give voice to the people online so they understand the technology. So you not only have community representatives, community leaders, but the end user. So we have examples again, where they actually show their feedback is, I'm going to reshare your fabulous resource that you've translated, or I will comment on it, or I will just make fun of it. And that to me is the best. So basically, that's the power of the new media now. We need to acknowledge the agency, that people are not passive recipients of information. It's really important.
Thank you. Sonia?
I don't often have access to the end user of my translations because I'm obviously dependent on the translation agency that sends me work. I do try to tap into my own networks if I'm ever unsure about any terminology or expressions like I was saying before, but the difficulty there is that I don't always have connections within the target community. But in that case, the best I could do is forward all my queries or comments to the client for them to approach the client or the community.
Thank you, Sonia. And perhaps the last question applies to you too. The last question is about regular checking of translation quality. Perhaps it applies to translators such as Sonia and language service managers. The rest, feel free not to comment. Sonia, as a translator, how do you check, or whether do you actually check your work, or do you have a mechanism with other colleagues who check your work, and do you do the same for them?
Yes, I try to, especially with larger scale projects. For smaller projects, not as often, but anything over a couple of thousand words, especially if we're working on big projects, we would do that, proofreading. Or even if it's just for smaller ones to consult each other on certain terminology, especially regarding Latin American versus European Spanish.
Thank you.
Just a quick one. As a government department, we have to show some transparency. So we have checking reports, so that when somebody pulls up a complaint, and I'd like to acknowledge Terry's done some amazing work at the foundation of the service. But also, so in terms of the checking report, but also, I forgot now. I will tell you.
It's okay.
There's, as you might know, Mustafa, there is a Victorian Health Translation website. It has been reviewed recently, thank goodness, because it was a disastrous collection of documents. In particular with health translation, the review, it's important to get the translation right. Because the idea of going back to the website or the translation database after a couple of years and checking those translations is ridiculous. There's no time. That original text will be substituted by a new text. Even things as simple as patient rights and responsibilities, it's something that is reviewed on a yearly basis. So in that sense, being in health, there's constant progress, I suppose, and therefore it's almost easier to translate something from scratch rather than review an existing document.
Thank you. Smile.
Again, I can comment on from a project management perspective. One of the things that we do is assess the source document against the languages that are required. And in some instances, we would not take on a project without checking. So that would be compulsory. If the client were to not agree, we would decline the project. So that's one level of, I guess, ensuring that there's a mechanism in place for checking. So if we're dealing with, the provisionally certified level or even less in certain types of contexts, we would definitely decline. In other instances, it'll be an option, and we would give the client the option to take on or take up independent checking or not. And there'll be some disclaimers around why we would give that option, because we can't completely guarantee the accuracy of the translation, because we're relying on the selection of the team. At the end of the day, we could not verify how accurate or not it is. So there's this level of vetting at the early stages of, I guess, reviewing the translation parameters. But the end of the project, we don't necessarily have a review process other than proofing.
What about regular checks in the sense of, let's say, we are a language service provider. We have provided the translation of thousands and thousands of pages. Is there a stage where you, as a language provider, decide to pick up a few samples from different translations and have a fresh look at them, or a team of translators and experts?
Certainly on our own projects we don't, because we try and set those parameters at the beginning. However, what we do is have a look at any previously translated or documents that relate to that particular project, especially if it's an update. So we do actually check previous versions to identify if there are significant variations from the source or mistranslation. We try and highlight that so that we're not, passing on that to the next version.
I guess there's two stages to checking. One I actually assumed was standard practice, which is during production. The second is that we usually would follow up with the client after a period of time and just ask, does it actually work? Would you like to do more? And how effective were the translations? So with that, we find that some have thought about that, but a lot haven't. So it's a good reminder to go back and see which languages were read. Usually there's statistics for that, that's downloadable or whatever it is. But during production, I'd assume it was sort of part and parcel of what it takes to create a good translation. So the text coming in, of course, will be read by the project manager to check the text is actually good to begin with. Instructions will be given after the conversation with the client. Goes to the translator, comes back. There'll be a reviser involved at that stage. Now, the revisers are chosen so that we get the best possible feedback from the translation. So that may be a reviser in the source language, mother tongue of the source language, or it might be of the mother tongue of the target language. It depends on the type of text that we're working with and what kind of mistakes we expect may have cropped up in there. We know some translators, revisers don't work well together, have different philosophies around translation. So it's very much a responsibility of the project manager to be across that and to communicate with the other project managers around and the reasons why. So checking, yes, absolutely. Every single translation that goes through is checked. Whether we go through a DQM kind of assessment as to how many mistakes were made in a particular category, that would be relatively rare. But it certainly does happen when there's cause to believe that a particular translator is not performing as they should.
Thank you.
But I thought that was standard practice, to be honest.
Thank you. Okay, very good.
Just very briefly, because I know it's the end of the afternoon and we're looking forward to going to our dinner party. No, very briefly, and bearing in mind that our graduates are going to be out there in, once they graduate, we've introduced a student-led practice, and the Chinese group have been very active with that, especially last year in the Chinese into English translation, but now we've timetabled the student-led session so that they get together and basically work collaboratively to revise each other's translations, but also the interpretive sessions. So I think it's a mode to start getting them used to work with others and criticize each other constructively so that they are ready for when they go out there.
Okay, thank you.